We're in Hebrews chapter 12. Come on there, brother. How are you? Okay. I can't see the names. We're in Hebrews chapter 12. Have we done any in Hebrews 12 yet? We're just starting. Okay. Let me talk about Hebrews 12. What I like to do today is lay the background, Old Testament background, so that you can understand what's going to happen in chapter 12. The first thing we're going to describe, he's going to open with a paragraph, and he's going to say, we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Now, we know who those witnesses are. They're the citizens of chapter 11. So all of the witnesses, beginning with Abel and coming down to the last one mentioned, the witnesses are there in chapter 11, and we're beginning chapter 12. Now, years ago, somebody said, does this teach that the people in heaven look down on earth and they watch us? The answer is no. The observation is that we are on earth, they're in heaven, and we look back at their earthly lives, and their lives become examples for us. So he's going to give emphasis here. They all died in faith, not having received the promise. So this is the key idea that is a demand of faith. And he's saying everybody in chapter 11, they all died without having received the promise. That is, of the coming of the Messiah and the establishment of his kingdom. So every one of those people. So what does that say to you and to me? It says that we may have to die in faith, not having received the promise. That is entrance into the kingdom. And now verse 39 and 40 of chapter 11 said, is that they all died in faith, not having received the promise, so that without us, the writer and the reader, they should not be made complete. So he's saying there is coming a time in the future when every gospel believer, from Abel to the last one that's going to ever be redeemed, together we're going to inherit this salvation that's offered in Hebrews, that 9:28 says, that Christ, when he returns, he shall bring with him. So the definition of this salvation in Hebrews is entrance into that kingdom with Christ. So chapter 11's purpose is to show us that we wait by faith, and if the promise isn't fulfilled, we die in the faith, waiting for God to fulfill his promise to the Messiah. So God will fulfill his promise to the Messiah. Now, the second item that occurs in this chapter is that he looks back to Proverbs and does a quotation, and he says, there is going to be a time in your life when you will be disciplined. And then he goes back. Did you ever have any threats from your mother that said, when your dad gets home, you're going to get it? I mean, so dad came home at 5:00 in the afternoon. So when dad came home, mothers reserved the spanking, the whipping, for daddy to do it. I'd rather for mother to spank me than for my father to spank me. There's a due diligence in his spanking that seems to create a little more pain. When we think back in our childhood, now mother disciplined me because she loved me. If you have a child that keeps running out in front of the three-wheeler, in front of a motorcycle, in front of a car, in front of a lorry, in front of a truck, then if you ignore that child, then you show that you don't love that child. But if you take the time, you stop, you rescue that child, you spank him, you discipline, you send him in to sit in a corner, whatever your method is of discipline, then you show your love for him. So he's going to use the human analogy and say, look, your human parents loved you by disciplining you. And you knew that that discipline was coming from love. Likewise, he's going to say, God disciplines those you love. Now, if you aren't disciplined, he says, then you aren't loved. So that's going to be the second idea that this chapter is going to bring forth. And then he's going to tell us, you know, this race that we're in takes endurance. I remember when I was in the 11th grade, I always had to work with my dad's businesses. So I didn't have any freedom to play sports. So I decided that I wanted to play football. So I can remember going out for football. And one of the things I remember is American football. One of the things I remember is at the end of practice, we had to do laps. We had to run around the outside fence of the football field. And whether it was a mile or 2 miles, and then you'd go running and you'd feel the burning in your muscles. You'd feel the shortness of the breath. You'd feel the discipline. And so we had to run a race even though we have this struggle. So he's telling us prepare for this opposition that could come from our bodies or from the world. Now, the next thing he's going to do, he's going to draw a contrast between two mountains. There are two mountains in this chapter, Mount Sinai and Mount Zion. Mount Sinai and Mount Zion. Mount Sinai is going to be represented by Moses. Mount Sinai is going to be a representative of the Mosaic covenant. Mount Sinai is going to put fear in the hearts. There's going to be thunder and lightning. Mount Sinai is going to represent Exodus chapter 20 and the giving of the 10 commandments. And so once you see the fear, and you're going to learn something as we look, I'm going to give you the background of Exodus 19 and 20. So in Hebrews chapter 12, you're going to need, I think it's Proverbs chapter 3. You have to study Proverbs that's quoted. And then second, you need to really learn Exodus 19 and 20. And then there'll be, after you get past Exodus 19 and 20, you'll learn that's the Mosaic covenant, Exodus 20, the 10 commandments. Right? Then you're going to have that contrasted with Mount Zion. Mount Zion, we have come to Mount Zion, the city of God. We have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyous songs. We have come to the God, to the judge of all the earth. We've come to the church of the firstborn. We've come to Jesus Christ, the mediator of a new covenant. We've come to his blood that speaks a better testimony than the testimony of Abel. So you get a contrast between Mount Sinai and Mount Zion. Now, it's very interesting, Pastor, what we learn here is that we learn something. At least I learned from listening to the students. Who gave the Mosaic law? And the answer is God. Now, I happen to think it's the Lord Jesus Christ, but that's still deity. Second, how many commandments? Well, it begins with 10, and then it's going to expand to 613. When you take all of the commandments, all the commandments, you have 613. So you have Mount Sinai. So this is the question that came up last week, and this is tomorrow morning's, Thursday morning's lesson for India, has to deal with answering this question. Who gave the 10 commandments? God did. did God fail? Did God fail when he gave the Ten Commandments? Now, when you read the Ten Commandments, you see, for example, the 10th commandment, Exodus 20, verse 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not covet your neighbor's male or female servant. You shall not covet your neighbor's donkey or his animal. You shall not covet anything. So this is the question that's asked. If God knew that the Israelites would fail and not obey the Ten Commandments, why did he give the Ten Commandments? So the question is,
to show us we were sinners.
Yeah, right. Very interesting, Doug, the discussion that came up. So I created 2 illustrations to address this question. So one of the things I want to do today is I will show you Exodus 19 and 20 to show you that God did not intend on the Mosaic law for justification. God did not intend on a purpose to give the Messiah the kingdom on the basis of Israel's obedience to the Mosaic law. If he had, then he would have guaranteed that Israel would have never inherited the land. So this is my illustration. Jay, I think you'll appreciate this.
Sir?
In India, yeah.
Sir, God knows everything. So God knows that the Israel people will not follow the law.
Yes.
Even that he has given the law. So can you just clarify that?
I am. That's what I'm doing. Okay, if you take the word auto, A-U-T-O. Now I learned this from they did this in India. You take the word auto and spell it backwards. O-T-U-A, correct? O-T-U-A. That is the name of a new 3-wheeler truck, electric, that's being developed in India. So I want to use this as an illustration. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, Doug. How do you pronounce auto backwards? O-T-U-A, whatever. Anyway, this is an Indian word. Now I want to describe this as a 3-wheeler. That means it was created basically on like a motorcycle frame, Doug. But it's a plastic truck, and it's a cargo truck. It carries freight. The nice thing about it is it'll go 150 kilometers on battery power. And then if you add the second set of batteries, it'll go 300 kilometers. And then a plus for the driver, if you're in the front, it's air conditioned. So you would like this job, Jay, if you were working in the daytime when it's 100 degrees, when it's Celsius 50 or 45, you would like it. So now let's say that a family buys this this truck. Now you and I know, let's say, and they have a driver, and the driver picks up kids, and there's 10 seats in this little truck they've converted. All right. Now, when the driver gets to the school, how many kids are going to get out of that truck? It has seats for 10, maybe 20, maybe 25. They will pack it in. So the truck could carry a load greater than 10 kids. Now, it was designed to carry 10 kids. It carried 20. Did it fail? No, it did what? It accomplished the purpose for which it was designed. Now, on the way home one day, the driver gets a phone call from his grandfather. He says, grandfather, come to my house. I want to do something. I want you to help me take this tree down. So so the driver gets to the house and he puts a chain to the tree and hooks it to the three-wheeler. Now, when he goes to try to pull the tree out of the ground, the tree is a third of a meter thick. Then the three-wheeler cannot pull the tree out of the ground, correct? Did the three-wheeler fail? Did it fail to pull the tree? Yes. Did it fail to meet the original purpose for which it was designed? No. The three-wheeler was not designed to be a tractor. Now, so the grandfather calls another man and says, bring your big tractor. He brings his big tractor. He hooks a chain to the tree. He hooks it to the tractor. And the tractor, with its powerful engine, pulls the tree out of the ground. Did the tractor fail? And the answer is no. Why? Because it was designed to do what? To pull trees out of the ground. Now, did the three-wheeler fail? No. Why? It was not designed to do what? To pull the tree out of the ground. Am I making my point? Now, here's the application. The Mosaic Law was not designed to justify a person from their sin. Number one, the Mosaic Law was never intended to deliver a sinner from the penalty of sin. Second, the Mosaic Law was never designed to give the land of Canaan to the Messiah. God was not so foolish as to make the giving a justification on the basis of a sinful person who could not obey the law. So what we have to do is we have to back up and say, what was the purpose for the giving of the Mosaic Law? Now, if I have two bottles, bottle A and bottle B, and bottle A is poison and bottle B is a remedy, but you have 5 people, they love bottle A. It's beautiful. It looks nice. And so they keep saying to everybody, drink out of bottle A. And they never say drink out of bottle B. Now, what is bottle B? It's the remedy. Bottle A is the poison. Bottle B will reverse the poison. As long as you're focused on the poison, then you are not preaching the remedy. So everybody is dying, and we need a remedy. We don't need A. Now, bottle A is the Mosaic Law. Model A is the preaching of the Mosaic Law. It will not bring a person to justification. This is what we've got to understand. So when we go in and look at the background of Exodus 19 and 20, I know I have measured the response to different students over time, and they don't believe what I first began to say to them. You cannot use and preach the Mosaic Law for salvation. It will only establish guilt. It's only a bottle of poison. So now when you come to, let me give you 3 passages of scripture that wants to substantiate this. And they're going to come from Romans. Romans chapter 3 and verse 20. Romans chapter 5 and verse 20. And Romans chapter 7, verses 7 to 10. Romans chapter 3 and verse 20. Romans chapter 5 and verse 20. And then Romans chapter 7, verses 7 to 10. And that's going to give you Paul's interpretation of the Mosaic Law. and its purpose. And then I'm going to look also with you next class in Galatians chapter 3 and verse 19 says, what was the purpose of the law? Now, if you know chapter 3, it says justification in the first 14 verses by faith. If the law wasn't given for justification, and then verse 16, if the law wasn't given to give the land to the Messiah, what was the purpose of the law? And then the answer is going to be, it was given because of sin, Israel's sinfulness. So, and when we understand what that means, you'll see. So what happens is when you get to this section of scripture in chapter 12, and you get down to this first mountain, you get to Mount Sinai, then I teach the Mosaic covenant. And so when you get then to Mount Zion, then you have to make a choice. Where are you going to camp? Where are you going to sit down? Where are you going to make your theological basis? On Mount Sinai or Mount Zion? And Mount Sinai is the Mosaic law. And too many preachers are on Mount Sinai. They don't know that it's poison in a bottle. They think it's going to bring a guy close to God. It only separates God and man. So, morning, VJ. Are you with us yet, VJ? Anyway, so what we have now is, so I'm trying to, we got a contrast in chapter 12 of Hebrews. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Fine, sir. Thank you.
We're looking at Hebrews chapter 12, and I'm just doing a survey and an overview of the chapter. So we're down to the section where there's going to be a contrast between Mount Sinai and Mount Zion. And so the point is that the readers of Hebrews, the first readers, they're going to have to make a choice. They're going to have to make a decision to go back to Mount Sinai and accept the Mosaic covenant and accept Moses as their dominant teacher versus Mount Zion, where Jesus is the teacher, where Jesus' new covenant has obsoleted and replaced the Mosaic covenant. And that the focus is going to be on the person of the Lord Jesus Christ, whom Israel, those who camp on Mount Sinai, reject. So what happens is when I finish the lesson, people begin to say, wait a minute, he's anti-law. No, I'm not anti-law. I want to know the purpose for the Mosaic law. So the illustration I use, VJ, I create, there's a new truck in India, and it's an electric truck, and they take the word auto, spell it backwards, and that's the name of the truck. It'll go 150 kilometers on battery power. It'll go 300 if you put the double batteries. And if you're the driver, you're happy because it's air conditioned. And so I use the analogy, if you take the truck and you go to school, you pick up 10 kids. When you get to school, they brought all their friends. There's 20 people in the truck. Well, the little truck carried 20 people successfully. But then on the way home, you stop at Grandpa's house, you hook it to a tree with a chain. Can it pull the tree out of the ground? And the answer is no. It failed to pull the tree out of the ground. Why? It wasn't designed to be a tree removal. It was designed to carry 10 people. That it does what it's designed to do. The Mosaic covenant accomplishes what God intended it to do. It does not accomplish what he never intended it to do. So when we go to answer the question, did the law fail? The answer is no. It did not fail in meeting the objective that God has for it. Now, there are three of those objectives in Romans that are clarified. Romans 3:20. By the law is the what? Knowledge of sin. The first thing that the Mosaic law does, it gives you a standard. Now remember, there is another law. Hammurabi is a king, and he has a set of laws around 1700 BC, 300 years before Moses gives the Ten Commandments. But Hammurabi's code never has like Exodus 20, verse 17. His code never prohibits mental imagery, mental thought. The Mosaic law puts that even as sin. So it's the Mosaic law is a far stricter set of commandments. So when we correctly understand, like for the Mosaic law from Deuteronomy 28, Deuteronomy 28 is divided into two sections. The first 14 verses have blessings. If you obey, I will bless the fruit of your womb. If you obey, I will multiply the animals in your among you. If you obey, I'll bless your crops. You'll be blessed when you come in and when you go out. That's the first 14 verses. That's the positive side of the law. Then at verse 15 to 68 of Deuteronomy 28, there are 43 curses. You lose your fiance, somebody else takes her. You lose your land. You're driven from the land. You get boils, you get poor health, your crops die, your herds die. You get all these curses. So we have to, and people don't know that about the Mosaic law. It isn't about all blessings. It's about 3 times as many curses as blessings. So when you finish, you need to comprehend this. So now let me give you the 3 standards from Romans 3:20. Number 1, it gives you the standard for sin. So now I've never pole vaulted, and I don't know what the height is, but it's at least 18 feet plus, maybe 19 feet in English. So a runner takes a pole and he runs, sticks the pole in the ground and springs off of it. And he takes his body up into the air, and here's the pole, and he goes over the pole without touching it, and he goes down. And if the pole doesn't fall off, then he passes. If he knocks the pole, touches it, it'll fall down. He fails. The Mosaic law sets such a high standard that no one can get over it without knocking the pole down. So the function of the Mosaic law is to identify the sinfulness of an Israelite. The function of the Mosaic law is not to save, but to let you know that you're a sinner. Have you ever gone down the highway? I remember, Doug, I was in Oklahoma and I had an 83 Ford van, and I'm driving and I go over this hill, and this car had passed me and it's sitting now on the side of the road. The police pulled it over. Well, I was going beyond the speed limit and I didn't get pulled over. And I felt really blessed. Later, I understood my speedometer overstated my speed. So I actually was not breaking the law, but in my heart I was. But I got away with it simply because the measurement was wrong. But God's measurement will never be wrong. The function of the Mosaic law is to show the standard, such a high standard of sin, that everyone's conscience would be pricked, would feel guilty. Number 1. Number 2, Romans chapter 5 and verse 20. Now the background for this is 1 Corinthians 10, verse 8, and Exodus 32. And it says that when the law was given, when it came in alongside of, sin did what? Increased or decreased? Sin actually increases. So if you want to promote sin in a person's life, you preach law. Now you think that preaching of law is going to produce holiness. It doesn't. The preaching of law, when you put the standard there, you get a rebellion from the part of the people. So when you go to Exodus chapter 20, Exodus 32, when Moses comes down the mountain, how many people that day are obedient to the Mosaic 10 Commandments? Now, chapter 20, the verbal edition's already been given. Then chapter 32, you get the first written edition. So the Jews know the law orally, and they're getting the written version. That night, because of sin and rebellion, God puts to death 23,000. Think about it. And the Levites put to death by sword 3,000. That's 26,000. That is an illustration for Romans 5:20. You can sit there and brag about being under the Mosaic law, but you don't know the facts. The facts are that when the law was given, what happened to the volume of sin? Did it increase or decrease? It increased. Preachers don't know that. Preachers don't know. They don't understand. You know, you don't give a butcher knife, a sharp knife, to a 3-year-old and playing with other 3-year-olds. They'll stab one another. They don't know how to use a tool. I have a friend in Dallas, Texas, and now he has only 3 fingers on his right hand. Why? He didn't know how to use a saw. He cut his finger off. When I saw him, he put his finger like that through his ear. Well, because he didn't have a finger, it looked like he had stuck his finger straight through his brain, but he cut his hands off. You don't give tools to people, stupid idiots. And the people in the pulpit are idiots when they preach law for sanctification. They don't know that law will stir up a sinful nature. Romans chapter 5, verse 20, when the law came in alongside the Abrahamic covenant, guess what happened? Sin did what? Increase. So if you want to illustrate that, you go back to Exodus chapter 32, and you say, how many people die by the sword? Moses said to the Levites, put your swords on. And all of these people, they built a golden calf, and they're out there in revelry, and they're sexually immoral. And that night, they killed 3,000. But when you read 1 Corinthians 10, I think it's verse 8, he said that God put to death 23,000 more by plague. That's 26,000. So I asked the question, can you expect, if the law failed to produce holiness in Israel, will it produce holiness among Gentiles? And the answer is absolutely not. God's Holy Spirit doesn't use the tool of law for holiness. He uses what? Faith in the gospel. Now, the third use of law comes in Romans chapter 7 and verse 7 to 10. Now, Doug and I live in sunny Florida, and our trees are green and our grass is green. If you go to Oklahoma, where we lived for 35 years, I had a friend come down from New York. We had this great, beautiful yard. In June and July, it is so green, so lush. It's beautiful. He came down in January. What was the color of the grass? Brown.
Brown.
It looked dead. I mean, it looked terrible. So he said, he came in the house and said, oh, Bob, I'm so sorry. I said, what? Your grass died. I laughed because his grass was green in January. My grass was brown. I said, no, it's dormant. It's asleep. Now, in chapter 7 of Romans, the sinful nature, let's take a young, innocent girl in America. Her sinful nature is asleep. She doesn't know the rebellion that's possible in her heart. Now, you have the preaching of Exodus 20, verse 17. Thou shalt not covet. Now, what happens? She goes on a date with a young boy. She doesn't know her capacity for sinfulness, for disobedience. The sinful nature is dormant. When the prohibition comes, she has to make a choice to honor her father or honor this boy by being careless with her behavior. The sinful nature is dormant. The law arouses it. It springs to life. In Oklahoma, in the wintertime, you look at a tree and it looks dead. Come April and May, the wind has been blowing. The temperature has arisen. The sap begins to run and it comes up the bark, comes in and begins to feed the branches. And suddenly the little small green leaves begin to grow and the tree blossoms. It was dormant, but it sprang to life. Paul says, listen, your sinful nature is dormant. And if you understand Exodus 20, verse 17, it will cause a rebellion. It will spring to life. Do you remember mercurochrome? And
Chrome and methylate.
yeah. When you cut yourself, boys, young men, when you cut yourself, you won't mercurochrome. It will not burn. But if they put methylate on there, man, it must have alcohol or something, Doug. It burned, right? So it made you aware that you had an injury. The function of law is to make you aware that you have an injury. It's like methylate. It will burn you. So it causes it to spring to life. A dormant, sinful nature springs to life with the preaching of the prohibitions. Paul says, I didn't know what sin was until he comprehended the correct interpretation of Exodus 20, verse 17, thou shalt not covet. And then what happened? The sinfulness of the sprang to life. And what I have learned through life is what makes it a sinful nature springs to life, becomes active. What is going to make it go dormant? The only thing is the preaching and the belief of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. The antidote for law is the gospel of Jesus Christ. So when we get to chapter 12, we're talking about which mountain are you going to camp on? You have to be willing to give up the Mosaic law. You've got to understand that the intent, the purpose of the Mosaic law, Jay, is to identify sin, to arouse sin, to make a person aware that they're sinful so that they will look for another way to be related to God other than by law. I have a friend who's now president of a mission organization. The first year he went to work, he was a civil engineer. He resigned and went to work for a less salary at this mission organization. He had bought a house. His in-laws came over. They had 2 young infants. In the middle of the night, the grandparents woke up. They smelled smoke. They called my friend, and so the son-in-law and the father-in-law go to the front of the house, open the door, and when they open the door to the living room, the entire front of the house is burning. You cannot exit through the front door because the whole living room is on fire. You'll die of smoke and burn. Now, what do you do if you're that father-in-law? If you can't go through the front door, where do you go? You look for another door. You go out the back door, correct? So the grandmother grabs one of the grandbabies, and they got to run across through the snow, Jay. They got to run through a foot of snow to the neighbor's house, knock on the door at 3:00 in the morning, crying out for help to get out of the cold. They're just in their pajamas, night clothes, and there they are. So if one door is shut, then you look for alternatives. The function of the Mosaic Law is to shut the door to works so that you will look for a faith relationship with God. This is for the Israelites. Very, very, very important. So this is, again, coming out of the discussion from Sunday night's class. So I'm trying of this chapter. So in order to prepare, you have to make a choice. You have the warning that comes. Are you on Mount Sinai, or are you going to move over to Mount Zion? Now, Mount Zion is a totally different picture. You have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God. Isn't it wonderful? Doug, one day we're going to go and visit a city. The New Jerusalem, the city of the living God. That's how the contrast, you've got fear and gloom and lightning and smoke and thunder, and the people are going to beg, give us a mediator under Mount Sinai. But over here on the other mountain, listen to the description. You come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God. You come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyous chorus. I didn't hear them sing on the night Jesus was born. But guess what? In heaven, they're going to be singing. There's a joyous chorus. Then he continues, we have come to the church of the firstborn. Wonderful, that this description. We've come, then he's going to come back and say, we've come to God, the judge of all the earth. We've come to the spirits of just men made perfect. We'll deal with that a little later. We've come to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and his blood speaks a better message than the blood of, which is forgiveness, than the blood of justice cried out from Abel's blood. So there's a big difference. And then you deal with the next issue is the fifth warning. So we'll have to review when we get to the end of chapter 12. We have the fifth and final warning given in the book of Hebrews. You remember the first warning in chapter 2 and verse 1? So this is a good time when you're reading through. When you meet the next warning, you go back and you review. And what is the first warning?
Drifting away.
Yeah, just being indifferent, not paying careful attention, just being careless. And if there's anything that marks Americans, we are careless about religious things. So that you do not let it slip away. There's a false sense of security. People think they have everything without having to wait for Christ to come from heaven. They do not. So there's a real warning, chapter 2 and verse 1. Then we'll come to chapter 3, then chapter 6, then chapter 10. And then finally we come into chapter 12. You get the fifth warning. So that's how this particular chapter is laid out. Now, which mountain do you want to camp at? You can't say, well, I'm going to put my left foot on Mount Sinai and my right foot on Mount Zion. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to make a decision. So when you come to this point, he's saying to the readers, you've got to abandon the Mosaic Law. You've got to abandon the Mosaic Covenant. You've got to give it up. You've got to understand that the purpose of the Mosaic covenant, number one, was not justification. It was condemnation, to establish that you're a sinner, that you're guilty. Number two, the Messiah was not promised the land of Canaan, his inheritance, on the basis of Israel's obedience to the Ten Commandments. No. If it were, then he would never get the inheritance. Why? And we would not share it because Israel didn't obey. Now the question came up, well, if God knew Israel would not keep the Ten Commandments, why did he give the Ten Commandments? Well, when that question is asked, that says to me, you don't understand why he gave the Ten Commandments. And it's important that we do. Number one, what reason? To identify sin. Number two, so that sin might increase. Number three, so that it would awaken dormant nature, so that you can see that you are in great need. You know, I could have cancer and not know it. I may feel great today, but tomorrow I may become aware of cancer. I have a friend, a childhood friend, my best friend, and after 40 years, he got my phone number through another friend and called me. So 2 days ago, 40 years I've not talked to my friend Billy. So we were happy to have a good discussion. So he had three children, 2 girls and a boy. And I said, how are your children? Billy now is 83. So he's a year older than I am. So he said, well, Mark died, at age 48. He had a cancer of the brain that came on suddenly. Second, he said, Melanie died at 55. She was an RN, a nurse. She died of a heart issue, an aneurysm. You know, 2 out of 3 of the children died. We don't know the tragedies that come, that are going to come our way. So we need to be prepared. So what's the function of law? The function of law is to reveal sin, not only by nature, but by act, but by nature. The purpose of showing you Billy's, the death of his 2 children is that, you know, that's their nature that dies. Their body died, and they were unaware of it. You could have cancer without knowing it. You could say, I'm a good person, but you actually are sinful in nature. The function of the Mosaic law is to let you know your sinfulness by nature. Why was Moses one of the meekest men of all ever? He knew his sinfulness. Imagine, he was a murderer. You think about Moses, a good man. Moses murdered an Egyptian soldier. He had no right to do that, but he did. In defense, it was a wrong decision. He had to flee for his life. So we want to be careful. We want to understand. So what happens as I was teaching, they want to know if God knew that Israel wouldn't keep the Mosaic law, then why did he give it? So then I asked the next question. Did God know that Adam and Eve would break Genesis 2:17's law? And the answer is yes. He's omniscient. Then why did he give the law? What if he hadn't given Exodus 2:17? Then Adam and Eve could not have sinned. If in Nevada, one of our states out west, in the old days, there was no speed limit. In 1970, I was in Nevada. You could go 100 miles an hour and you didn't break the speed law because there was no speed limit. If there was no Exodus, if there's no Genesis 2:17, thou shalt not eat from the tree, Adam and Eve would have never sinned. But God knew if he put the tree there and he put a perfect person there and he puts a one prohibition and Satan is permitted to come into the garden, what happens? he knew in advance that they would what? Sin. Well, then why did he do it? They asked the question, why did he give the 10 commandments if he knew they're going to disobey? I asked the question, then why did he give one commandment if he knew they're going to disobey? And in class, I have a crystal ball that I look down into to get an answer for a question for which there's no answer. The only thing I can say is, number one, that God created knowing that Adam would sin and knowing that Israel would sin. That is a fact. In spite of knowing that they would sin, he decided to create this world that we now live in. And the other part of the answer I can only say is that God took our sinfulness without credit to us, Romans 8:28, and he brought out it the glorification of himself. He revealed what he is like. And what is our God like? He would become a man, bear the penalty of our sin, die for us, and give us the opportunity to come into relationship to him by faith in the gospel of his son. So we can say that in the simplest form, that God used our sinfulness and rebellion and brought out of it good with no credit to us. The good is his glorification. He used that to reveal what a wonderful being he is. So we have to ask that question. So when you think back now, when you go to Exodus 19, let me give you just a little bit of background for Exodus 19. Exodus 19, God comes to Israel and he recounts their previous relationship. So he's going to come to them. He's brought them across the Sea of Reeds. He let them escape from Pharaoh. He's dealt with their rebellion when they were fussing about food. And he brings them to Mount Sinai. So that's the background. So we need to come to Mount Sinai, Exodus 19. And there Moses goes up and he meets God. And he gets instructions. He says, go down and tell Israel to prepare to meet me. In 3 days, I'm going to come on the mountain, and he's going to come with thunder and lightning and smoke, and there's going to be an earthquake. And he says, don't even let an amoral animal, and that is a sinless animal, don't even let it touch the mountain. If it must be killed. And don't let a sinful human being touch it. So he puts up a fence around the mountain so that Israel will not disobey. Then he says, now look, when the trumpet sounds, what is Israel supposed to do? Come up the mountain and meet God. Exercise faith. Now there was a long trumpet blast. And guess what? Did Israel come up the mountain? If you look at Deuteronomy 5:5, you will see that Israel refused to come up the mountain. They didn't come up the mountain. So before the law is given, they disobey God. Why do they disobey God? They don't trust him. They're afraid of him. They don't know what he's like. They don't have faith in him. So Exodus 19, then you have then this storyline where they're shaking. Chapter 12 of Hebrews says, even Moses was afraid. Fear was in everyone's heart. Now, so that's Exodus 19. So Israel did not obey before the law. They had said to God, tell Moses, you tell God, whatever you say we'll do. And what did God say? He didn't say climb a mountain. He didn't say swim or ocean. He said, just come up the mountain to my presence. And they refused. So now that from the mountaintop, he gives the 10 Commandments. Now, when he finishes, is he so attractive that he draws Israel to himself? And so a crucial verse is Exodus 20, verse 19 and 20. So you need to learn 19 and 20 of Exodus 20. So what happens is, after the law is given, what's the most afraid you've ever been? Were your teeth chattering? Were your knees knocking? You're so afraid. It says that the people are afraid. So they, as a response to God coming on the mountain. So when Moses comes into their presence, what do they ask Moses for in Exodus 20, verse 19 and 20? They ask for a what? A mediator. Now, you have a friend and you get upset with him and he gets upset with you. And you're so angry, you won't talk to him, but you need to talk to him. So what do? You go and you hire a lawyer, an attorney, an advocate. You hire a mediator. And the mediator is going to represent you. So between your friend and you place whom? The mediator. When you put someone between you and your friend, you are further away from that friend than you were before you were giving a mediator. So Exodus 20, 19 and 20, the people say, never let God speak to us directly. Give us a mediator. You be a mediator. You speak for God, or we will die. They don't trust God. So the Mosaic Law came, and when it's given, it produces fear and not love. It produces this question, give us a mediator. So Moses is 80 years of age. 80 in this chapter of Exodus 20. And so he gets the 10 Commandments and he's given a request, give us a mediator. Now you need to fast forward in time and you look at Deuteronomy 18:15. 40 years later, Deuteronomy 18:15, 40 years later, Moses is at the end of his life, 120 years of age. And there the text says, listen, I'm going to answer your prayer request of Exodus 20, 19 and 20. I'm going to give you a mediator. He's going to be like Moses. So now you learn something. This mediator is going to be comparative to Moses. So what was Moses like? You need to put this in your mind. Number one, was he a good teacher? Yes. Right? Was he a good warrior? Yes. Right? Was he a good priest? Yes. All you can say about Moses, he was a good man in a positive way. So now you expect that. Was he a great healer? Yes. When they got bitten by the serpents, he went to God and God gave them the solution of looking and living. So now when you come over to the book of John, chapter 1, they say to John the Baptist 5 questions. They want to know who he is. The Old Testament, God has been silent for 400 years. He's not communicated. Between Malachi and Matthew, there's 400 plus years of time. And they say to John the Baptist, are you the Messiah? First question. They say the second question, are you Elijah, the prophet? And then they say the third question, are you that prophet? This is the prophet we're talking about. They want to know if John the Baptist is the one like Moses. They want to know if John the Baptist is their answer to the request in Exodus 20, verse 19 and 20. And he says, no. And then he tells you, he says, there's one in your midst whom you don't know. That's Jesus. That's Israel's problem. They didn't know who he was. There's one in your midst. You don't know. Well, the idea of this prophet that's forecasted doesn't go away. When you get to chapter 6, Jesus feeds 5,000 men, remember? And then 10, 15,000 women and children. So maybe 20,000 people with what? The loaves of bread and the fish. So that miracle occurs. At the conclusion of that, the people say, Jesus is a great teacher. Number 2, he's a great provider of food. What did Moses give us? The manna from heaven. He's a great healer. Wow, let's take him by force and make him a king. This must be that prophet. So they think Jesus in John 6 is the answer to the prophecy of the coming. So you can see how that goes from Exodus 20 to Deuteronomy 18 to chapter 1, chapter 6 of John's gospel. So you see that now, but let me go fast forward to John 19. What does Israel do with this mediator? Crucified him. You see the sinfulness?
Bob,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. They not only crucified him at the end of his life, but he fought opposition every single day. It says, considered him who endured such opposition. He got rejected and rejected by his own people before the cross.
Absolutely. That's so tragic. So you can see the question is, did God know? Did God give the 10 commandments? The answer is yes. Did he know the sinfulness of Israel? Yes. Did he know that all died in Adam and Eve? Yes. But he gave the law anyway. Why? It wasn't designed to pull up a tree like that truck. It wasn't a tractor. That wasn't its mission. It was designed to reveal the sinfulness of Israel. It did not fail. The law succeeded in accomplishing. It carried the 10 kids to school. It carried the 20, but it couldn't pull the tree up. It wasn't designed to be a tractor. It wasn't designed to be an instrument for justification by faith. It wasn't designed for sanctification. It was designed to reveal what? Sin. And so it did not fail because that's what it does. It reveals sins. So in chapter 12, we come to Mount Sinai. We abandon it. We give up the Mosaic covenant. We go to Mount Zion. We meet God. We meet Jesus. We meet the new covenant. We meet the forgiveness of sins. Which mountain are you camping on? The answer has to be the
Sir?
only wise choice. Yeah.
So before God has given the law, means that whatever Israel people did, that means that all or whatever they did means that was all right for them. That means that was not sin, because they don't know what means what the things they prefer for the sin. Like they don't know that if something like they are doing, this is not sin, because after after law they follow that these are the things, if we do that means this is
Okay, wait just a minute. Okay. Yeah. Let me make an assumption. The race is Adam and Eve lived 10,000 BC. The Mosaic law is given in 1446 BC. For 8,000 years, the human race lived. They did not have the Mosaic law. Do they know they're sinful? Don't forget, they know the conscience. You are given conscience. In Romans chapter 2, the Gentiles have conscience. We know when we strike someone that we've done wrong. Our conscience tells us we did not show love. So but you're correct. The Jews have a more precise definition of law. So their consciences will bother them more But the Gentile doesn't have the law, and his conscience still bothers him. He has laws that the parents give him. He has laws that society gives him. He has laws that government gives him. So there are ways that our conscience has standards. And if you violate those standards, your conscience condemns you. But you're correct. The Jew has a more precise definition of sin because they have the law. So they're more guilty than the Gentile. So no one escapes because they don't have the Mosaic law. None of us obey the conscience that we have. BJ, how's your day going?
Yes, sir, fine, sir. Good, doing it.
When is your next conference?
It's August 23rd, sir.
August the 23rd.
You can stop recording, sir.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Sir, I have a question, sir. I just got from a people. Mark 13:32.